Give a good ability. In fact, watchmakers are ruled by Saturn. Okay.
I have a friend who's a very good watchmaker.
Okay. That
Wow.
their chart probably has strong, powerful
I'd like
Saturn.
to know. I'll probably ask him that.
Yeah. So because Saturn rules discipline. Okay. It rules the ability to take things and put things together, take things apart real well. That's like the watchmaker that can fix the watch. I have a watch. In the old days I had a watch called Hellbros, Hell Brothers, okay, Hellbros. And on the symbol of the watch, on the front of it, is a symbol of Saturn. And the old watchmakers knew from where their trade came from. You know, Saturn is called what? Father Time, the measurer off of all things. We call watches chronometers, after Chronos, Saturn's name. Saturn in the Greeks and the Romans, they called them Chronos. So we got our word chronometer, Father Time, the measure off of all things. So we're dealing with, in its negative sense, if it's afflicted in a chart, we find people that are very unforgiving sometimes. They live in the past. Remember, Jupiter's visionary, living in the future. They're optimistic. Saturn tends to be pessimistic. The cup's half full, or if it's half empty. If it's a Jupiter, it's half full. If it's a Saturn affliction, it tends to be half empty. It's seeing the dark side of everything instead of the light side, which Jupiter sees. Saturn is impatient at its worst. People that have afflictions with Saturn tend to be very impatient, very demanding that other people fit into their schedules, and can be hard to live with a person that has that. I smell something burning, Elena.
No,
Okay. All right. That fits in this lecture real well. We got a Mars affliction in this
Which
house.
affliction is that for you?
Mars. Something's burning, Mars. It smells terrible, doesn't it?
I don't smell it.
You don't? I do. Anyway, so all things. By the way, Jupiter rules smell. Did you know that? Jupiter rules smell. Saturn rules hearing. What is hearing? It's the little stirrups in the ear, the bones in the ear that allow you to hear something. Saturn rules that. Okay. Remember who cut off the ear of a servant in the Bible? Peter drew his sword, cut off the ear. Saturn rules the ear. Peter was Saturn in the Bible. He was Satan.
Painter that cut off his ear.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, but it'd be interesting to look at that chart, wouldn't it? Mm-hmm.
There you go.
So all these things are really something you're looking at in a chart. You're looking for these aspects. If you see somebody that has a lot of crosses with Saturn, it's hard because they're very, how would I say it? It's very hard to change their outlook because there's a lot of pessimism and a lot of viewing things on the dark side. I find that people that have Jupiter on a cross, for example, have great amount of authority and power over that. What did I do? Did I go back? There it is. So Jupiter on a cross will tend to be better off for their crosses. It's like Jesus on the cross. He resurrected off the cross. How did that happen? That happened because he praised and he gave thanks because he was love made manifest. Okay, and so that these energies in a chart represent your ability, your capacity, if you would, to really deal with crises in life and how you deal with them. Okay, so if I see someone has a cross with Jupiter on it, I know that they have the power to resurrect off of that cross. They have the authority, if you would. If they understand the knowledge that it's required, they can literally transform every cross into great blessings, because that's what Jupiter is, blessings and beneficence. Okay. In my case, in my life, with Jupiter on a cross, all the things that have ever happened to me that seem to be other than good have always worked out for my highest good. And that's part of faith in good, or God, okay, if you would, that comes from Jupiter. Okay, so Moon to Mars afflictions. We're going to look at some of this just to see if we can interpret it.
Are there any more planets?
No, we're going to just go through them like this. Okay, Moon to Mars afflictions, feelings hurt easy, emotional insecurity when faced with danger or threats. That's what happens if you see that Mars-Moon affliction. The other thing with Moon and Mars afflictions is physical, the physical side of it, okay? Okay? Now, the feeling hurt easy, that's the emotional side of life, okay? Okay? Um, the emotional insecurity when faced with danger or threats, that's what Moon Mars can happen. Um, it's, it's, um, it's a hard aspect, especially for women to have that aspect, Mars Moon. It's still good, it's not good for anybody really. I mean, it can be an aspect that causes a lot of problems in life. It can produce stomach ulcers, for example. Why? The moon rules your stomach. Okay, now we're getting into the physical side of things. Surgery of the stomach, why? I find often that people have, particularly women that have this aspect, very often, even if they don't have surgery of some kind, usually they do, they'll have something that'll happen in the female areas, that's the moon, the functioning of the womb and things like this. I was doing a chart just the other day, and I said, you know, I see you've had because she had Saturn now, not Mars afflicting the moon, but I said, I see you had ovarian cysts. Now I knew that specifically, that shocked her. She said, yeah, I had surgery for that. I said, generally also when I see this affliction, and I see that kind of energy in a chart, it indicates abortions. And she said, I had an abortion. And so she was a little bit set back in her chair when I did this, because she was hearing exactly something I could see from her chart that was really relevant to her life. And she had Saturn in the 5th house, so she also couldn't, or hadn't, I said, you have never had children, and you have a hard time because you want to. And she acknowledged that. She said, it's absolutely true. She says, I have no children, and now I'm trying to, and I'm in my late 30s. Do you think it's possible? And I said, I'm not going to tell you if it's not possible, because I would never tell somebody that, but it's going to be difficult. And it has been very difficult, because the person she's with now, she'd like to have a child with, and she can't. So Saturn in the 5th. Why the 5th? The 5th house rules children. The first child particularly. And she aborted that child. Saturn, Satan, the devourer of all of his children. How did I see that? Saturn in the 5th. That's an interpretation. Does that mean everybody that has Saturn in the 5th is going to have exactly the same thing? No. You know, it takes a looking at the chart in a holistic way. In fact, when I had published that, or my wife had published all those readings, she actually published it on YouTube, and or I had something about it that I had said, and somebody wrote back that I have Mars squaring my Sun, my Mars in Aries, and my Mars in Aries and Moon in Cancer. Does that mean, you know, whatever, that, you know, I'm going to have surgery? You know, there are several factors in interpreting of a chart. One is the youthfulness of a person. A lot of things won't happen to us in our youth, but they'll happen as we get older, unfortunately, because as the body ages, we begin to become more prone to things and weaknesses that we have in our chart. I mean, I was, you know, always strong of heart, strong of mind. In my life, I was a runner. I was a competitive runner in high school. I had a lot of strength for endurance and running. And I've always thought I was kind of, if you would, impervious to some of these aspects. Why would this happen to me? For example, I have Mars in Pisces squaring my Sun. Mars in Pisces, Pisces rules your feet. So there's another interpretation. Mars can injure the feet. I would have never thought I'd ever have problems with my feet in my life, being a strong runner, and always have just really very quick on my feet. And I remember when I was a child, I ran everywhere. I was always running. My parents couldn't. I'd go upstairs. I would never walk upstairs. I'd always run upstairs. And my parents had a problem with that. How come you're always hurrying? What's a rush? I said, I don't know. Just the energy I have. But when I got older, I ended up with plantar fasciitis, and I had to have surgery on my foot. And then the next foot did the same thing, and thank God I didn't have surgery on that one. But I got over it. But the point I'm getting at is these aspects, these meanings, sometimes come out later in your life. And so you got a 20-year-old that says, well, I've never had surgery. You know, I've never had problems with this aspect. I find, for example, Mars squaring Moon. Right now we're talking Moon to Mars. Very often there'll be breast augmentation because they want to have bigger breasts. So they get surgery on their breast and they implant things. That is happening more and more, I see, in charts with this aspect. Okay? It can also be things like breast cancer, things like that. So if you know you have that aspect, it's good to be aware of it. There's a difference between Mars and Saturn's aspect. Mars afflicting the moon is much more, deals with inflammation, with surgery, with cutting. That's all Mars stuff. Infections, Mars. For example, a woman that has Mars afflicting the moon needs to be more aware of vaginal infections, things like that, the female area. The moon rules all that, okay? Mars, can create infections. This is a brand new thing and it's falling apart. So anyway, so what I'm saying is that with Saturns are chronic problems. Saturn tends to be things of a chronic nature. For example, the word chronic again comes back to Saturn. Saturn rules and means chronic diseases. So, okay, so stomach ulcer, surgery of the stomach or female parts, breast surgery, for example, can be childish when intimidated or aroused emotionally. Remember I told you that the moon is your child in you. It's the child in you. It can be bombastic emotional response to things. Mars, anger, want to fight. Okay, if you have a child with that aspect, it's something that you need to be aware of because they can be quick to temper, emotionally aroused to great temper. Mars, the sun, can do the same thing. I was born with that aspect. Okay, it can give a quick temper as well. The moon tends to repress things though. So very often anger with Mars aspects to the moon means somebody represses a lot of things. The problem with the repression is it produces physical problems. Okay? Okay, so can be childish when intimidated or aroused emotionally. Needs for food or sex to relieve anxiety and tension. Back to the moon. The moon needs succulence. It needs something to offset the tensions of a planetary aspect that's stressing it. Okay? So here's...
What does that look like in a chart? Moon, Mars.
Oh, it could be square opposition, any aspect of affliction. It could be 45 degrees. That's an aspect of affliction. It can be 135 degrees, which is a quincunx. That's a stress aspect. These are over